Helljumpers, Chapter 14, Feet First into Hell.
2 months!
Twilight shouted as she pummeled a punching bag.
I told them that they need to be on planet to make contact with Equus every fucking time. They told me that they're running through paperwork to get us cleared to go down to the surface.
Falling down on all 4 of her legs, Twilight rotated 180 degrees and bucked the bag, causing it to tear off from its chain that it was attached to. Calm down, Twilight. They can't keep you up here forever, Mac tried to reason. And there's something going on that they're not telling us. The battle cluster around here has only been growing.
I know! That means the window of opportunity I have to make contact with home again is probably shrinking.
Twilight fumed as she moved on to the next punching bag.
I mean, look at that pile of parchment over there. Since they now know we can receive dragon mail, they've been updating us and asking why I haven't been able to contact them again.
Mac remained silent, having nothing to bring against Twilight's point. The pony was now punching and kicking the living shit out of the current punch bag. She had been at it for at least 1.5 hours by this point. Are you done yet? I'm pretty sure any of the other soldiers that train here would appreciate not having all the equipment destroyed, Max said. Twilight momentarily just looked at the punching bags she had already gone through and decided that Sarge was right. Though, she kicked the current bag one more time just for good measure. She got her towel and made her way over to the showers. A quick shower later, and she was back into the hallway, fully armored up due to the orders from Brass that they had to be ready at all times. Having run every test she knew of at least, 3 times over in the past 2 months, she was anxious to get down to the surface again since the magic connection in space seemed to be too weak to allow Dash to dreamwalk. Walking into a drop pod bay to the lower part of the ship, she found Scootaloo, Lucy, and Tyler going along with some other ODSTs, playing a game of cards.
Raise 20.
Scootaloo said as she pushed 2 chips forward. The Pegasus had become quite a bit better at the game than when she started, having won on a few occasions at least when, Twilight wasn't playing with them. Twilight took up a seat against the wall and grabbed the science book about advanced slip space theory she had been reading. She had been keeping notes on the concepts lined out in the theory. They had a lot in common with how teleportation worked. The alicorn was lazily flipping through the book to the place she left off, never making it to the marked page as alarms started sounding. All hands, battle stations! Every ODST present shot up and ran to a weapon rack, loading their preferred weapon into a pod. Twilight levitated a suppressed Magnum and a DMR into her pod, and Scootaloo slammed a suppressed Magnum and an SMG into hers. Sparkle! Mac called out to the alicorn, getting her attention. Take a sniper instead of a DMR. Without Woods, we don't have anyone for long range. Twilight begrudgingly pulled out the DMR and its ammo from the pod and replaced them with a long gun and its ammo. Stepping into the pod, she strapped herself in, cursing the fact that seats were designed for humans. Listen up, ladies, Mac shouted over the comm. There's a fleet massing just outside of the kill zone of the Super Max. If one of those bastards make it to the surface, it's our job to kick them right back into their ship, Mac continued. He clearly was getting a feed of tactical information. I don't have to remind anyone here that this is Earth. There is no other planet we can fall back to if we lose here. We either win here or we lose and also lose the war and all die. Since I'm quite happy with my life right now, I'd rather win. Don't you all agree? Mac shouted into his mic.
Yes, Sergeant.
Twilight and the others shouted in unison. Damn right we're gonna win. Alright, strap in everyone. If the Dawn gets hit, the captain will fire the pods to save as many crew for the fight down below as possible. The pods sealed, ready to eject at any point if necessary. Inside of them, Twilight was reading out the information onto the monitor. 2 carriers and 13 battle cruisers had jumped into the system onto Earth's doorstep. Outside of those ships, 3 battle cruisers were already destroyed by fire from the UNSC's home fleet.
Wait, one of the carriers is charging for the planet. At current bearing, it will come down over New Mombasa,
Twilight said as she was quickly trying to interpret the data available to her. New orders from the bridge appeared onto the display before her, which got relayed back by Mac. Everyone hold on tight, we're dropping into the city down below, Mac said as he started up a countdown on the screens in the pods. 30 seconds, he called out. 15, 10, 5, 4, feet first, Mac shouted at 3. Into hell! The other ODSTs replied as the pods started firing in rapid succession. Twilight felt the G-forces on her body as she was hurled from the bottom of the ship by electromagnets. She quickly checked every instrument to make sure nothing was off and the pod was working correctly, finishing just before she hit the atmosphere. Nice and toasty out there, she heard Tyler say over the comms, the temperature rising inside as well as due to heat. Shut up, Savage. No time for your BS and a drop, Mac told him. The fire around the pod died off as they bled through enough speed, and that was the moment that Scootaloo reported in.
Sarge, I'm getting a bit of a shimmy on my pod,
she reported.
Scratch that, I'm spinning now.
Scootaloo immediately shouted afterwards. Deploy your air brakes, Hurricane, Mac shouted to Scootaloo, who was now drifting off course severely.
Not responding,
Scootaloo shouted back, her voice strained as the G-forces on her pod was increasing.
Firing thrusters!
The rockets on her pod ignited, trying to slow her down, but while it did succeed in slowing the pod down, it also increased the rotation immensely, putting a lot of stress onto the drop pod. Finally, reaching its breaking point, the door to Scootaloo's pod ripped off soon, followed by the rest of the pod disintegrating.
Scootaloo!
Twilight could only watch in as the distance she could see the debris from the Pegasus, her drop pod rained down to the city. Her own air brake had engaged by this point, only seconds away from touchdown. The rockets on her pod fired, reducing the speed even more to an acceptable landing velocity. The pod smashed down to the ground, knocking Twilight into her chair, and her head buzzed from the sudden deceleration. Dazed, she opened the door of the pod and levitated the sniper rifle next to her, checking for any hostiles, finding that none were present. Further up the street, she could see Mac and Lucy standing in front of their pods, having also determined that there were no enemy contacts at the landing site.
Oh gosh. Sarge, Scoots went down a few clicks north of here. We can make it there in an hour with some luck,
Twilight said over the comms. Negative, Sparkle. If she made it out, she'll be long gone by that point. We have our orders to start pushing the Covenant back. Hurricane is a mite bit small, but she's tough as nails. She'll be fine on her own, until she can find a unit to hook up with.
But she...
We're gonna go east to hook up with other UNSC forces. That's an order, Sparkle, Max sternly told the Alicorn. Savage landed a bit further up. We'll hook up with him and move on to the city center. Get a move on, Helljumpers! A few minutes prior, Scootaloo was frantically pushing buttons in an attempt to deploy the air brake. Moments later, she had fired the thrusters onto the pod to try and slow down that way. The pod suddenly shrieked as if the metal was tearing off, unnerving the Pegasus even more. Pulling the emergency release for the air brake, she finally heard the brake come out, but before she could shear, the pod hit another bump, causing the door to fly off, along with the air brake. The sudden drop of pressure dazed Scootaloo, and before she knew it, she was flying through the air in a free fall as the safety harness had come loose from the pod. Below her, she could see the pod disintegrating, and now being out of her pod, she rapidly decelerated to a manageable speed.
Oh crap.
Scootaloo unfurled her wings and beat them furiously. In the past 2 months, she had regained the ability to hover and even have short flights, but nothing compared close to sustained flight. But then again, with practicing flight, there wasn't the fact that she was going to be turned into mush if she didn't figure that out soon. Remembering all that Dash and Twilight had taught her, the feeling of weightlessness Rainbow had described when she was flying and Twilight's lessons on how to flap wings came to mind. Trying to concentrate onto the feelings of weightlessness, she felt something moving from her chest to her wings, something that felt warm and comforting to the Pegasus. The moment the feeling spread throughout her wings, she started to uncontrollably jerk in random directions with each flap.
Flap your wings in a controlled fashion,
Twilight's voice echoed through her mind. Scootaloo changed her strategy from furious flapping to a controlled wing beat and got immediate results. Instead of dropping like a brick, she got into a controlled nosedive. Checking on how much time she had left, she quickly saw buildings coming up to meet her. Going into a flare, she tried slowing down to landing speed, but even with the increased drag, she was still going too fast. Scootaloo smashed down into the roof of a building, skidding about a dozen meters before coming to a stop. Groaning in agony from the impact, she stayed onto the floor for a moment. After the initial pain subsided just a little bit, she checked her body.
Okay. Nothing broken. Okay, good. Oh, thanks Celestia for Pegasi Bones.
She thought, hoping that she didn't have any internal damage because that would be a death sentence in this situation. Checking her equipment, she found that the armor plates were still in place and secure, but when checking her radio, she found the transmitter to be completely thrashed.
Well, bucking fantastic,
she shouted, turning the radio on to try and catch a signal. In the distance, she could see a frigate called the In Amber Clad and 3 pelicans coming over in her direction. Tapping into their communications, she listened in onto their conversation.
The message just repeats regret. The
voice of a lady came over Scootaloo's radio.
Catchy. So, Any idea what it means?
Another lady asked. In the meanwhile, Scootaloo was looking over the roof to find another way down to the street, not wanting to try her luck with flying again. She got distracted as a male voice answered the two ladies. Well, let's see. Dear humanity, we regret being alien bastards, we regret coming to Earth, and we most definitely regret the Corps just blew up our raggedy-ass fleet. Hoorah! The conversation went on, but Scootaloo missed the part as she was too preoccupied laughing. If she ever met the guy, she would give him a beer. Suddenly, hearing the sound of buildings coming down, she jumped up and saw a scarab walking through a pair of buildings and shot down the three pelicans. One of them getting hit by the main cannon and probably killed everyone instantly actually, but inside the other two, they got hit by the AA gun on top of the walker and made a crash lander on either side of the scarab, respectively. Immediately jumping into action, she jumped off the roof in a controlled glide this time. Touching down onto the pavement below, she looked back at the building. She smiled under the helmet as she ran further towards the crash site. She had just successfully flown further than she had ever have before that point. A few minutes of running through the narrow streets later, being motivated by gunfire, she reached the crash site where the burning remains of the Pelican was located. Again, she heard the sound of gunfire coming through a hallway just a little bit further. Pushing herself around the final turn towards the soldiers that had crashed, she saw the bodies of several Commandant assault waves littering the ground, but when she saw what was attacking the Marines, her blood went cold. Hunters. Scootaloo reached for her SMG, finding nothing. She cursed and she checked her armament to see what she did have. 2 grenades and her combat knife. Looking at the two aliens, she saw that they had their backs turned to her. Taking a few deep breaths, she jumped from her cover and charged forward. Neither hunter took notice of the Pegasus as they were blasting the Marines in the building, and Scootaloo grinned beneath her helmet as she rammed a primed grenade into the first hunter's lower back.
See you in Tartarus!
She shouted as the alien turned his head to see the pony back off. Seconds later, a dull explosion went off and the individual worms that made up the hunter flew in every direction. The second hunter let out an enraged roar and charged at Scootaloo. Her eyes widened as she made a quick roll out of the way. Not a second too soon, as the shield from the alien slammed down onto the concrete where she had been moments before, in the corner of her eyes, Scootaloo could see something green, moving swiftly towards the other hunter. Her eyes went wide as she recognized the armor. That same armor that Maria had. Mjolnir. There was a Spartan here.